afternoon, everybody.
Really quick, there are no minutes to approve.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Call to order our Finance Committee meeting for today, the 7th?
Yes.
It is.
Thank you. For the 7th of March. We will begin. We have no minutes to approve. Is there any comment from the public for any items that aren't on our agenda? We are going to spend today finishing up on the town, on the warrant. We have the motions that came in from the planning board from their work yesterday, which we received earlier from Erica and within the half hour from Erica. So I think we're current on that. We're going to continue our discussion on our island home, and I hope with that we will have completed our work of getting through our reviews and making the motions that are necessary for this all to go to print. So just before we begin, thank you, Brian, thank you, Libby, thank you to your staffs for your work this year. Very much appreciated. Hopefully we haven't antagonized you too much along the way, but
no, thank
appreciate
you very much. I think we'd agree this has been really good.
I wish Cliff were here, and I did not hear from him, and I have not seen him, so I kind of doubt he's going to be here. So unfortunately, Gene, your request, I think, is to hear from him on the island home is going to go for naught. I guess would you like to take up all of the planning board motions, and we take them up individually, obviously, but ahead of discussion on our island home, and that way we can discuss until our heart's content or until 6 o'clock, whichever comes first. Okay. So, Brian, would you just make sure as a guide that we have got everything, and I think the first article is Article 3.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
And I noticed that there's a take no action attached to it now.
Yes, that's correct. There's no other prior year appropriations to reappropriate other than ones that were in Article 10.
Okay. And you don't anticipate something popping up between now and...
No.
Okay, great. Can I have a motion to take no action?
So moved.
A second? Favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Well, that passes as take no action. So then we go to Article, I think they're planning board articles.
We actually, Mr. Chairman, are you going to take the Article 6 and 10 as well before?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, I'm sorry.
So I need to ask for you to reconsider the vote on Article 6 because when we made changes to remove some OPM services that we had talked about actually putting extra money into the DPW budget, we had actually moved some of those OPM services into various capital projects, and in the zeal to get this done, they were accidentally omitted from what was sent in to be put into the warrant. So I would ask that you would rescind the vote from yesterday and then hopefully re-vote in a positive manner with those added in. I do apologize for that oversight.
Somebody, is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Okay, so now, what's the pleasure of the committee? I think that Brian's just explained that we're moving some money that otherwise he didn't have yesterday. So, is there a motion to adopt the Article 6 with the fund transfers as outlined in the warrant?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. And what was the next one?
Article 10,
Article 10.
which is the capital article, Mr. Chairman.
Which is the capital article. Okay. So, Does there a motion to adopt the Article 6 with the fund transfers as outlined in the warrant?
Second. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
on the warrant starts on page, actually, ironically, starts on page 10. Goes through page,
Okay. So my copy, which is the one from Erica just recently, shows that there's still some holes here. Is that what
Article 10
everybody
didn't
has?
make it in.
This is the one where there's still a paragraph that says need.
Need and,
Article 10's not in here.
I sent it to you, so actually.
Okay, well. Oh, because I didn't realize you wanted me to send it to her. Oh, I thought you had sent it to her, so that's why I didn't.
Okay, so, between him and I, we did not get it. So, why don't we, see if somebody,
Yep, I'll email it to her right now. Yep.
to,
I'll just forward it to her right now
yeah,
from you, and just tell her to accept the changes.
yeah, and tell her to send it to them
Yep.
and us and,
I'll do it right now.
okay. So everybody follow what we're
we're
doing?
gonna have it, try to get it sent to you.
Yeah, before we,
Yeah.
so why don't we go on and pick up on the planning articles, which I think starts with Article 40.
Actually, Mr. Chairman, just Article 24 was not voted yesterday, which was the bond proceeds.
Thank you.
And there is one minor edit. The word "will" in the motion has to be stricken. It should not say move that the town will vote. It should say move that the town vote.
All right, and was that stricken?
It is not been stricken. I just received that email from town council about 5 minutes ago.
Are you all comfortable with them striking it without us seeing it stricken?
Yes.
Since
Should we put that in the motion or no?
Yeah. You want to?
I don't really care either way. I just don't
No,
know
I
what's
mean,
the
why
more
don't you
correct
just-
way to go, you know?
Yeah, why don't you just make the motion with the fact that the word will be taken out in the final.
All right, well then, motion to adopt Article 24, presuming that the word "will" is stricken from the first sentence.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. So you guys will obviously take care of that.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, in my rush to get to 40, is there anything else in between?
No, Mr. Chairman.
I'm being,
No. I will call her right now. Yeah, I just forwarded.
okay, so Article 40. The Harbor District, and I guess, assuming the planning board with the changes approve the article. I move that the article be amended as follows. So they went through and made changes.
On Article 40,
Yeah.
what addition do you have? I don't have any comments.
Did you get the 330 from me?
Yeah.
Just keep that's what we're saying.
Yep, I got it, okay. Now I'm up to speed.
Well, at least we can't have a cruise ship terminal. That's right. Any discussion about this that you want to have? Well, I'm catching up on it. Peter, you live down on the waterfront. Is there anything here that
Looks fine.
Okay. Anybody? Any motion to,
Motion to support the
no.
planning board?
Motion to adopt?
yeah, all we're doing is, we're
Motion to-
supporting the planning
right.
board motion.
No. Motion to support.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. So the next one is, I think, 47.
I'll make a motion to support the planning board's motion.
Any discussion? Their motion is to take no action. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Article 55.
Did you have 52 last week?
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. 52. Planning,
Missed that one.
planning board moves that the zoning map be amended as follows. And, this is Daisy Way and Old South Road. Going from RC to CI. Or RC into Commercial Trade, Enterprise, and Craft Districts.
Probably have a map in what, where's Daisy?
I have no idea. Do you know what Daisy Way is?
Yeah.
This is a test.
Yeah, looking around.
It's,
Filter. Henry, where's
It's-
Daisy Way?
it's adjacent to Hannibal.
It's a non-answer.
Behind the Thai food place?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It's across from the Thai food place.
Okay.
So it's a dead end lane on the let's call it the southwest side of that park as you turn into the airport. If that makes any sense. That was a good one though.
So two of these parcels are town-owned. Some others have some storage buildings on them. So they're moving out of the RC2 district, which is very permissive, and then putting it into use category or into zones that are consistent with the present use.
And anybody want to make a motion to support the planning board motion?
So moved.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Okay. That was 52. 55. Is a zoning map change, Knobska Way and Appleton Road. RC2. To R5, I think.
A couple of strikeouts.
Mm-hmm.
So just two parcels.
Planning board move that the zoning map be amended by placing the following properties currently located in the RC2 district to the R5 district. And they have struck out, looks like,
2, 4, 5, 3, 4, 5, 6.
looks like it. Yeah.
This is their article, right?
Yeah, and 20 Knobska Way, 22 Appleton, 24 Appleton. Any discussion? A motion to
Motion to support the planning board.
second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. I think the next one is 62. This is another zoning map change from Lug 1, Woodland Drive and Skyline Drive. And the planning board move that the changes be made. Any discussion?
Move to support the planning board's recommendations.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. And I think the last one is Article 75, which is their technical amendments, and that was just sent to us this afternoon at 3:30, I believe. So, any comments?
Sorry, what's the article name?
75, President. As I recall, an article like this appears most years as they work to clean up definitions and or expand definitions.
Trying to see if there's any differences between the article and the motion. It's very difficult to tell in this format. Well, I was comfortable with the first draft. I guess I'll have to be comfortable that they're the same.
All right.
And that being my assumption, I'll make a motion to support the planning board's motion.
Is there a second?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. All right, so with that, I think we are through with all the planning and zoning related articles, which brings us back.
No,
Yes,
it's fine. We're getting one of them back.
Yeah. We may not get any. Okay. Can everybody get their email?
Mhm.
Would you, Chris, could I, if you've got it there, would you mind,
What is the article number?
10? Or Brian, if you have, would you mind reading it?
Reading the motion, Mr. Chairman, or the,
Yes, well,
or I can tell you what,
section that talks about what we need to be filled in order to approve.
yes.
Actually, I've got it right here. Yeah.
Yeah, mine's fine.
So the motion that we have gotten or will get when your email comes through is proposed, was moved that the following amounts be appropriated for the following capital outlay expenditures, with all such expenditures to be made by the town manager with the approval of the Board of Selectmen, except the school expenditures to be made by the school superintendent with the approval of the school committee, and further that the town manager with the approval of the Board of Selectmen or school superintendent with the approval of the school committee, as the case may be, is authorized to sell, convey, trade in, or otherwise dispose of equipment being replaced as follows. So this includes,
And
is
this,
this the article?
yes, and this list is consistent with the Capcom recommendations, Mr. Chairman,
Okay. Yep.
which proposes, I'll take you through it real quick, which proposes to use $3,909,000 from free cash, transfer $279,000 from the ambulance reserve fund, transfer $1.6 million from the sale of real estate proceeds account, transfer from prior year articles $46,051, and that $1 million be raised and appropriated from the fiscal. In the email that you have, it says 2016, so I'd ask that we amend that to actually show the 2018 tax levy, and we'll make that change in the actual motion because we couldn't raise it from 2016 at this point. And that the total amount is $6,834,180, which again is consistent with the way that the Capcom had recommended the items be forwarded to you for consideration. And we will remove the quantum of vote since there is no borrowing there.
Okay. Everybody comfortable?
Sure.
So would somebody make a motion?
I make a motion to approve with the change to the 2018 tax levy.
Thank you.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Okay, so I think that brings us back to something that was held over from yesterday, which is a discussion of, I think, basically two articles related to our island home. One is the actual appropriation for the new facility, excuse me, and the second is the real property acquisition, which neither of which we voted. Correct me if I'm wrong, but we voted the zoning change, and we voted the sewer district map, the change that would impact the properties that are under discussion for acquisition. So, with that, I am going to recuse myself from this discussion and turn it over to Stephen. And want to join us?
Thank you, David. If the committee will indulge me, I see we have two members, including the chairman of the Island Home Building Work Group. And I'd like to ask if they have any information they'd like to present before we discuss.
Sure.
Thanks. David, I didn't tell you I was going to do this, so if you're not prepared to speak.
Members of the board, my name is Dave Fredericks. Probably a month or so ago, the selectmen asked me if I would chair a committee to take a look at the construction related to our island home. I would tell you that the group, when it first got together, had the normal concerns, understanding what the town had done for due diligence, what they had looked at, what they had considered. And I would say to you, over the last probably week to 10 days, our committee has found that the town's done a relatively thorough job of analyzing a lot of information. I think one of the things that the committee's trying to do now, and I think is very close to doing, is putting it all together in one consecutive or continuous, cohesive story. And we had a meeting today, and I apologize that I don't have a presentation. I think we will have something for the selectmen more formal by next Wednesday. And that will include a summary report, a series of timelines that outline each of the options, and there are really three options. Option one is that we go to Maya Comet as the town had planned. We build on the Sherburne property. Number two, that we would look at a way of relocating a landmark house and building between the two, keeping us in the general area of the site. And number three, building in a way that we use the building that's there itself, that we take down a wing, that we replace it with a new wing, and that we go through a very long, painful process of building, if you will, on the same property. When we're done with our analysis, and again, I apologize because I wasn't where I was going to do this. I'd simply say that to us, what we saw very clearly was there are, by building on the property, either the second or third option, there are a host of unanswerable questions. But if you simply look at it from the standpoint of cost first, what you see is that building on that property, and option one was relocating landmark house, comes at someplace between $6 and $7 million cost to the overall project. It comes both from the relocation of the facility, landmark, to make space, but also in such things as the people that are in there would have to then be relocated temporarily and housed. And then you're left with some other complications on the site. And then you have also about a 30-month delay in the project. And so when you put those together, you end up with a significant cost for that option. along with some unanswerable questions like where would you put the current residents of that of the facility. The second option that we spent a fair amount of time was, what if you build and add on to and somehow use the existing facility and replace it in phases? And that results in a need to reduce the number of people that are in there, which is, again, one of those unanswerable questions. How do you get from a level today that's 40-plus beds down to a number that's closer to 20 to 25 beds so that you can then rotate those people through the portions of the building that are not impacted by the construction? But what you see in that program are even longer delays. And so, again, those delays add up in costs and complications. And that site ends up with, under that model, of another probably $5 to $5.5 million cost, but a delay in the project of somewhere between 5 and 6 years of being able to deliver a project. You jump over to the Maya Comet base scenario, which is where the town had fallen in its process, and I think we're getting comfortable that that is something that can be deliverable. It is something that can keep a timeline that is closer to 30 months. It is, again, we're not 100% done with the budget process, but certainly within the realm of saying that the $30 million have allocated is a reasonable place to be. This is very similar to our experience at the school, where we asked for an allocation that when we were only probably 70% through the design. But the reality is cutting time off of these things and getting them built quickly can save you millions of dollars by not pushing them years out. And so we're trying very hard to build on that kind of understanding. And again, our idea is that we'll present a thorough finding in our report and kind of a public presentation next week at the Selectmen's meeting. But our findings after today, where we are all getting very comfortable that the pieces are landing where the town had found them to be. I will tell you very openly, we all had concerns over the last month that there was more due diligence to be done, and there is still work to be done. But the reality is we're getting very comfortable that the parts actually do add up to that being a very good decision.
Thank you. Yep.
Quick question, Dave, just to make sure I understand, the purpose of your work group was to really examine the construction cost and feasibility of the building, nothing to do with program and whether certain styles of skilled nursing care are better or worse. I mean, you were just looking at cost to build a building and other sort of developmental alternatives.
I will tell you, we started out with that understanding. I think for the committee to get comfortable, we had to understand things like what is the right number of beds, which got to what is the operating model. We had to understand then some of the cost impacts of certain choices, what are some of the reimbursement programs if you pick certain choices, and I think that's where we thought we probably had concerns, but as we put it together, and I'd certainly let the other members talk about this, we got very comfortable that the town had done a good job of making those decisions, in a way that were best for the long-term potential for this facility to be something the town can support in the long term, financially in particular. Stephen, do you disagree?
No, I don't disagree at all. I think I was probably the loudest voice, calling for clarification on the number of beds. Right now we have 45 beds, and we're permitted to have 45 beds in our nursing home. The state won't issue permits for new beds. I think they estimate there's 4,000. I think I'm remembering that number right. Empty beds in nursing home facilities around the state. So it's absolutely off the table that you get more. My question was, why don't we build to the level of our permit today? The plan that SMRT put together is 4 10-bed small houses with the opportunity to build a fifth. So if the need presents itself down the road, we can make use of that, of the extra 5 nursing home beds. But based on the current population at the Allen Home facility, 40 beds would just about be what we need. And the trends for reimbursement for care are not positive. If we went ahead and built the larger facility, first of all, it's obviously going to cost more money to build. It's going to presumably cost more to staff, and you essentially lose money for every patient every night that they're in residence. So building more wouldn't be the best financial situation for the town. And we're hearing from the consultants isn't in the best interest for the town anyway, given the trends of care, which are more towards home care. So for a number of reasons, 40 seems to be the right number.
I have a question. And it sounded to me like when you were speaking that you really found that the logistics of rehabbing that building were completely cost prohibitive because there was no place else to put patients.
So
And extended the project too long to have it make financial sense.
I think that was the real driver. You end up with the first problem is you have to relocate people. So are you going to relocate people that are in our island home? You're probably not. You're going to wait for the natural cycle of things to find enough opportunity when you get down 10, 12 patients or whatever the number is that you need to get down to. So you've got that delay. You have a huge risk in the fact that the state, most likely, the Department of Health, may not even support construction on that site with people being used in the other part of the facility. And so then you end up with, and I know we all like to look at Stop and Shop, and we say, hey, they did it, and I don't know if people remember that, but imagine if that was healthcare versus the annoyance of picking up your groceries. And you also, if you were to talk to them, I think they would tell you that the premium for doing it that way, and these are my words, not theirs, was in the 30 to 40% premium issue. So you have a premium for the construction, you have the value of the delay. And so how we valued the delay was very simple. If you take the 30-month basis and said, that's my comment, best case, permitting goes well, and this thing is done. And you said, okay, every other project has to be in that general time frame. If not, the current cost of a 4% inflator was used, which, by the way, I think is mild. I do estimating for people. Most guys are using even bigger numbers today. But at 4% on the cost of construction, it's about $100,000 a month. So if on option one, the relocation of landmarks 42 months, you added $4.2 million to the cost of the project, plus having a bunch of unknown risks. When you did the rehab, you end up with a very similar time frame and a host of issues that we're not sure how to answer. And then the underlying risk of what are you left with, but a building that you've done a great job building, but you built it on the basis of a building that has serious issues already. So are you able to find all those? It's refurbishing an old house to some extent as well. And so you look at all of this and the cost, and you say, to us, it didn't seem like that would be an option that the town would want to continue to spend money on.
And when you did this, did you also look at what the cost was of keeping, or what the cost might be of anything you would have to do to our island home in the 30 months it took to build the new project?
Yeah, so one of the things the committee took on, and again, it got back to our scope, had a little bit of creep to it. We had all gone through, we had investigated ourselves, because again, we wanted to understand what was in our island home today, what worked well, what didn't work well. And we all, at the exact same time, at the end of our very first meeting there, came back and had sat with Rachel and Libby and made sure that the FinCom had already seen enough of a proposal to them. So we plan to work with them to make sure the next 3 years are acceptable to the level of care that we want. So one of our subgroups of this committee is to help her make sure that she gets the resources needed to keep that in reasonable care for the next 3 years.
Because, correct me if I'm wrong, we appropriated $250,000 for this year. Well, next year.
We did. The way I look at it as one member of the building committee and one member of this committee is that we have to keep up that facility no matter what, no matter where that building's going to be built, and no matter when it's going to be built. So it wasn't important to me when looking at options A, B, C, 2 options at East Creek and 1 at Comet, to consider what the costs to keep up the current facility are, because they're going to be the same in any case. They'll be worse if we delay construction, but they will be what they're going to be for the next 3 or 4 years anyway.
Okay.
I saw Brian made a face. I think I said the wrong thing. The amount of money that we put through the island home this year was not the amount that I just said.
No, I would not.
No.
Some other email from his...
Gotcha.
Sorry.
No.
Nothing to do with the conversation whatsoever. Sorry about that.
Chris, you were going to say something.
Part of it got answered last. Thanks, David. The unanswerable questions, curious as to whether, if you could elaborate a little more on, are they unanswerable in a certain amount of time frame, or are they we just don't Give me a little more sense of that.
Combination of issues. So start with the relocation of Landmark House. We've done no soil samples. In today's world, what we believe is that land there, what we see when you look at what happened to some of the bigger houses, and those were homes, those weren't these large, 40,000 square foot building kind of issues. What you saw was pilings had to be installed and so on. So when you start doing that commercially, that would change any of the estimates that we thought about. It would change if we were building then between it and what those foundations might look like and how they would be complicated. So it's an answerable question, but not in any reasonable period of time. So from our standpoint. But number two, things like, one was a big one, was in order to move Landmark House, in order to build and attach ourselves to the existing facility, we have to find a place for the people that are in them to go someplace. So our assumption was simple. We said, let's assume $3,000 per unit per number of people that are in Landmark House, and let's assume that we could find them housing on island they found acceptable. I have no idea if that's real. So that's an example of an unanswerable question. We can talk about if we were to build on that site and build as adjacent to the existing facility, we know that we would most likely have to go in 2 stories to be able to fit what we have to fit because of what's happening as we drive. And so what we can do is we can have a discussion about what are all the things that would be impacted. There's a whole lot of response code issues within the state that would have to be built into the operating model. There is an impact on nursing, somewhere between a 40 and 50% increase in the amount of nursing staff. And so we take that and we turn it into a dollar amount. But again, that wasn't studied. That was discussed as a real tangible that needs to be taken apart. So it wasn't that we really couldn't answer them, but we had to make broader assumptions. And so those examples existed in all of our discussions about how do we value those in this discussion. So those were some examples.
And then there are some things that may be unanswerable. For instance, will the owner of the Landmark House, if we go for that option where we relocate Landmark House, will they be amenable to, working with us on their lease to do that? There was the question of if any private money was used to fund the construction of the Grossman wing. If those grants were tied to, not moving the facility or not changing the program at all, that may be may make that option a non-starter. So I don't know if you qualify that as unanswerable because, you're at the whim of the board of directors of a nonprofit that we haven't broached this topic with yet, or maybe it's not answerable within a reasonable time frame. But it's somewhere on that line.
Maybe risks at this point,
Right.
Management of employees was a big risk for us, right? So if you downsizing so that you can construct, what does that mean to it? We didn't try to answer that question. We know it's there. We know that if you count the number of people that are in our island home today, it's 38 or 39. It's maybe 42 this morning. But if you go down to 20 during construction, what do you do with your staff? How long does that last? None of those things were even talked about, other than to say it's an unanswerable question at this moment.
And just a comment, I take your point about the comparable to Stop and Shop, but I hope that the building of the contiguous healthcare facility is not the impossibility that maybe you suggested, since we're about to do one.
Yeah, no, I think they're manageable, and I think, and I know you're involved in the hospital, I think they can be done. I think they take an enormous amount of effort and enormous amount of coordination. And I think, and I won't speak for the hospital, but I bet if Margot had her choice, she would have a virgin piece of property and would be able to say, I'm building that, and not have to worry about relocation of Tim Lepre for 4 months and all the things that we don't talk about.
There's no doubt, but to your point, sometimes when forced to go back and take a hard look at putting it at the current location, what was deemed priorly impossible becomes the possible.
Yeah.
I think is on a lot of people's minds.
Yeah, and I don't mean to take up too much time. I would tell you this committee probably went in saying we need to do a lot more work to prove that. And I would tell you, and I would ask, Peter or Stephen, ask if they agree. At the end of 30 days and a lot of pushing, I was on vacation, and my wife will tell you that I spent every hour on this. And when you get done, you leave comfortable. The town's done a lot of great base work. As you ask a question, Libby or Rachel are saying, well, here's some work we worked on that. And you pull it out and you say, oh. So you reanalyze that and you challenge it and you say they've got a good finding there. One of the things missing, I think, was just pulling it all together in one package.
Thank you.
What do you think the biggest risk is in this process after you've looked at this?
Biggest risk is not getting the community to understand the value of time. We need to get this done. If you go through the facility, our elderly deserve something better than they're getting. It has nothing to do with staff. It has everything to start with the facility itself. And I think we need to value time. We need to get something that we're proud of built. And we need to, in the long term, have a discussion about how we operate it so that we can afford to do it for an entire series of generations, not just the next generation. And I think we have to be honest about what that means. And so I think the last is to work with the hospital and all the healthcare providers and decide how this really fits in a long-term plan for the island, which doesn't have to stop any of this progress. But we had a long discussion about home health care and how does it, and those are things that are probably as risky as getting this built, that we have to solve that as a community. Mm-hmm. I know I'm off tangent, but that's really the risk I see.
I guess this is a question for both of you. Is your work group going to publish some kind of a report?
We're going to publish a summary paper along with a series of timelines and simple maps that so people can understand what we looked at. And the second is we're building, with Rachel's help, a file where we can take all of the documentation that the town has done and organize it in one place to say, here are all the things that exist today related to these studies and things that have happened for the last 10 years.
Right, and just to underscore your point, Dave, a lot of this work has been done. It hasn't been presented in an easily digestible way. If we could somehow link frequently asked questions or some of the questions that we saw come out of the Island Home Work Group to the resources that are already available, to the work that's already been done, and hopefully in time that people read it and digest it and understand that this isn't a last-minute effort by the town. This is years long, and we are not so far away from having every T crossed and I dotted as it may seem if all you did was read Facebook and read the Island Home Work Group's report. There really has been a lot of work done. There is more work underway. We just recently, thanks to Dave twisting Don Bracken's arm, we got a new topographical study of the East Creek site, and I think also thanks to you, Dave, we're going to have, this is Dick Webb, and SMRT is working with the Army Corps of Engineers to sort of fast track a review of that new topo map so we can get some report back about what the storm surge modeling would look like. That's another thing similar to the RKO at My Comet. The storm surge modeling may completely rule out this site altogether. So that's an example of the new work that's being done that's added to all the other work that already exists. And what we're going to put together, and I said this an hour ago in the meeting, I don't want it to be another 30-page report that nobody reads. I want it to be more easily digestible than that, and hopefully compelling to the point that people understand My Comet is the best option, and here's the reasons why.
I would tell you, if to Stephen's point, I personally was probably insulted, and I don't read Facebook, so I don't, but my wife would say to me, somebody said this work group's a smoke and mirrors, and I think Jim Kelly would tell you that we challenged them from day one to say, we're going to look at everything we have to be comfortable, and they've given us the liberty to look at anything we felt to, and so in many cases we got way beyond the original scope to get comfortable. Stephen was very concerned about the financing and very concerned about the number of beds. Mike and I had a lot of concerns that, to your point, that they maybe had not fully analyzed. Could it be built on that site? Yes, it can be built. Is it worth a 5 to 7 year delay and a significant financial impact? And then lastly, is it worth not maybe working on the idea of being in Sherburne and building a long-term relationship there that's beneficial? And every model that you look at, the more the interconnections exist for the community of elderly care, the better the quality of care. And so, I think there's all those other soft issues that we don't really analyze, but they were in the backs of our minds. And so if you had asked me 2 weeks ago, I would have said we're not going to be ready. There's no way we can get through this volume of information. We were able to find a lot of it, and everybody was willing to make this a priority. So I think we're getting more and more comfortable. Would I love 90 more days? Yes.
Thank you.
So just one quick question. You mentioned that the natural cycle of things would reduce the bed numbers. Our elderly population is growing. How is that even possible?
No, what I was saying is, if we were going to build on the existing site,
Right.
you have to make space, so you have to take down wings.
So you
So we would have to wait years until a certain number of people passed away or moved away to
Right.
reduce the number.
Yeah.
And so then once we built it, we would grow back to the 40 or 45
So
beds.
you would essentially stop people from coming in?
Yes. We would have no choice because we have no beds, because we would have to take down wings. So
The only
we
other
get back to an
alternative is to move
unanswerable
everybody
question.
out.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that seems crazy.
Doesn't
Yeah.
make sense.
No. That's the antithesis of what that building is supposed to be doing. So-
Right. Peter, do you want to add anything? I see.
No, I think just one item that we brought up is we're taking what most would think is anecdotal, and as Stephen and David said, building files, literally physical files. Some of the things are, of course, paper and have to be scanned, but removing the anecdotal and providing backup. So I think that's important. I know it's to me.
Yeah. Jim? Thank you, Dave. And sorry for putting you on the spot like that. I should have told
Thank you.
Jim Kelly. So I just want to let you know that probably the best decision the Board of Selectmen's made on this matter is to appoint the building committee, because they've brought a lot of strength and willingness to work and bring this all together, which is really heartening. The report is going to go, we have it on the agenda, the interim report. It's on the agenda for tomorrow night. We're probably going to just accept that, and because we're going to get another revision based on the building committee's work today. And I think Dave's done a great job of explaining the building impact, the cost of construction. But I just want to add, as one of my personal things is, we have a serious care issue, quality issue at the nursing home that is related to the facility. It's public information, but we've had recently a patient burn, a patient fall, because as a result of some facility issues. We've been fined by the Department of Public Health, $5,000. So there's an urgency that the board believes that we need to move forward on this. We've also been discussing the quality that's published now monthly by the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare, CMS, that ranks our nursing home against every nursing home in the country. It's on a score on the quality indicators. It's on a scale of 1 to 5. We're a 1. So we have a lot of work to do, but we need the facility for patients, for the residents, but the staff to be able to function in. They can't right now that when the call button goes off, there's such great distance between the CNA and the resident that by the time they've gotten there, the person's gotten up and fallen. So we have to, the facility is in, that's a critical important to our success. And the small house model has a lot of benefit that we can talk about, but that's been the model that everyone's recommended. That we had yesterday the executive director of Leading Age, I believe it's called, which is the trade association for the nonprofit and municipal, now only one, members of this organization. All of their members are moving more toward the small house model. On the other hand, the for-profits, as they're replacing beds, are all maintaining the institutional model because they need to have a lower cost models because they have a profit motive. So, any questions of me?
So just to clarify,
Yeah.
what you're saying is the small house model is not the model that the for-profit institutions
That's
are going
correct.
toward?
Yeah, that was interesting. Like yesterday when she presented that, they're all keeping with the institutional model because it's they can make a
So then
margin.
this decision isn't about operating costs going forward. It's about really the quality of care that we can
Yeah,
provide.
yeah.
Thanks.
Well, can you elaborate on that a little bit? Because that seems to cut both ways to me, because one of the things I
Right.
get concerned about is I hear a lot of pushback on the operating losses of the facility as it now extends, and a lot of people are very concerned about the future of the Island Home as an institution on Nantucket,
Right.
because they think the town shouldn't be supporting
Right.
the level of investment that we do every year. And it sounds like what you're saying is there's an alternative, because people maybe with a profit motive are able to find a lower cost operating model, and I don't,
Well,
I
it's-
don't want to sit here as one speaking against quality of care.
No,
certainly,
and
but
yeah.
the alternative of voices arguing against the town being in this business versus a lower cost model actually sounds intriguing to me.
Well, I think it's not a model that we would ever recommend because it is not does not drive to improve the quality of care. So that's not something that the board and those who have been analyzing it have decided to move away from the institutional model, and we've been having that dialogue over the last couple of years. So
institutional model.
that's what we have now.
But-
Yeah,
but,
so
I mean,
they're
in
based
terms
on
of-
looking like a hospital. So
Right, so my question was going to be, in terms of this national scoring of nursing facilities, for-profit institutional models score lower than small?
no, I was just talking about Massachusetts and what this trade association is telling us what's being built. This is, I think there are 400 or so nursing homes in Massachusetts. There are 18,000 in the country, and this CMS measures us against the other almost 18,000. So, anything else? All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask you guys a question?
Please.
Did you look, I know you talked about sort of the beds of the piece, did you look at the possibility of building under the institutional model? Did you relook at that decision as it relates to the location?
No. No. David? Member of the public, David Worth, wishes to speak.
I don't trip and fall. Thanks very much. I had the opportunity to have lunch with the woman who, from Leading Age, and so there's a little bit of a nuance to what she had to say. So on the private side, I mean, one of the things that's going on is there are a lot of vacancies in nursing homes. Occupancy levels for skilled nursing facilities are declining. It's counterfactual to the fact that we all are getting older, but that's exactly what's going on. And so what's happening is the people that are building the small house model, principally right now the not-for-profits, are seeing much higher occupancy rates because it's much more patient-centered. So in the competitive landscape, if you're trying to make a decision about whether you're going to have a loved one in a small house model versus an available institutional model, it's driving towards the small house model. They're just more competitive. So what Elisa Sherman was talking about was the fact that what you're seeing is, while there's not a big rush at this point by the for-profit entities to build small houses, the competitive pressures in the marketplace are beginning to force them to take a hard look at whether this, in fact, is a better model, one that's going to allow them to have higher occupancy rates. So it's an interesting back and forth, but much of it is driven off of the fact that occupancy rates are declining fairly rapidly in the skilled nursing facility. Excuse me, and a lot of that's driven by the fact that people are staying home longer, and we're also getting older, and so the time that older people are spending in nursing homes is actually getting shorter. So there's a real dynamic in the marketplace that is a lot more difficult to answer than just sort of 2 or 3 basic questions. And I just would reiterate that it seems counterfactual that demand for skilled nursing is going down as the aged population is going up, but that's a national trend, and which is why there are 4,000 extra beds in Massachusetts. I mean, it's just remarkable how much that business has shrunk, and it's just declining demand.
Thank you, Dave.
I apologize. I've got to run, so I apologize. But I did want to. I do think that there's a couple things that you have to also consider when you think about small house versus options. We went down this path of saying that quality mattered. Obviously, it always does. But what we got out of the reports that the town had been presented was there was a night and day difference between the experience. There was one summary done for the town where they talked about the folks who are in those models where there is a connection with the community and they're doing small house models live as much as, I think it's like 30% longer than those without. So that was a driving point. But a second driving point for me was, and we didn't pursue it any further, was the need for flexibility. It could be 40 some odd beds with as many as 10 that really need a completely different standard of care. Those folks are level 4, I think they refer to them in the healthcare level, and they're all people that we know. I look over there, and I won't name names because we're in public, but people that we all know, and it might be their parents or their kids, and they don't really need our island home as you and I might think of it, but they need real care. Building this model gives the flexibility of this structure to be whatever the community needs for 40 or 50 years, where the institutional model very much boxes us in to the most expensive kind of care for all. So the loss of flexibility in that model scared me more than trying to analyze a model that says if my loved one moves in there, it will be clean, it will be professional, but it may not be the same standard of care, and they may not live as long. And I look at that, and for me, the decision was very quickly that the town's recommendation on the small house model was the only place for us to consider. That was just where I came down.
Yeah, I understand that, and believe me, I could not be more appreciative of the work you've done on this, so please don't take any of my questions to anything but...
I want the questions, guys. I no different than the committee. Let's challenge ourselves.
I'm just trying to reconcile it with the backdrop of what I hear every day from certain people, which is, you know, the expense of this and not wanting to be in this business, and we shouldn't be in this business, and knowing that, well, we make sacrifices to do everything on Nantucket.
Right.
We make sacrifices to be in this, to provide this service on Nantucket, and so I'm trying to reconcile this true angst I hear out of some quarters about why does tax money go towards this, with the notion that the for-profit people in this market are finding a place to do it in a different model that we've determined, against the backdrop of a space that a big part of the community wants to look, that we haven't looked at putting that type of building in this community, in this space.
I understand.
And in my comments yesterday, you know, I said, I get it, that this is a very complex problem. I'm sympathetic to almost every viewpoint I hear on it, but that's what I'm trying to reconcile in my own mind right now.
And it's back to the stretch for the committee. You know, is the committee here to solve all elderly housing issues? And I think that, personally believe that having a flexible facility and working with the hospital, working with Sherburne, looking at a whole lot of things related to how we do elderly services. In my lifetime, right, I'm 60 years old, I expect in my lifetime someone, either my wife or someone I know, will be involved in these programs. And believe that over the next 20 years, it's all going to evolve. And so just instinctively as a business guy saying one model for some premium, I don't know what that premium is, 5% or 10%, we have flexibility to service a whole new kind of pattern that may come at us. Seems to make sense. But if that experience for my friends is a little better, that lasts, again, I don't believe we're talking orders of magnitudes of $10 million savings by doing one model over another. So I challenge people to say, is that really the thing? If they want to get involved in healthcare, my challenge to those folks is, let's get a community group together, including the hospital, including Sherburne, including our island home, and over the next 3 years, as part of this, come up with a long-term community view about what we want to do with elderly care. That would serve those, and I think that would help ultimately drive down costs.
Thanks.
Libby?
I just want to mention that regarding the institutional model at the current site, I think there's a couple of things on that. Although this building committee did not spend a lot of time on it, internally we have talked about that quite a bit. And for one thing, there's the quality of care issues that Mr. Kelly and Mr. Fredericks mentioned. Secondly, we have a financial feasibility analysis which does indicate that over the long term, the institutional model is more expensive than the small house model. And lastly, again, anything's possible at the current site, but it's going to be very complicated to run the current facility and build any new facility, regardless of whether it's an institutional model or a small house model. And the likelihood of the Department of Public Health approving an institutional model being rebuilt at the current site with the residents still there is, as far as we have heard from our contacts at DPH and through our consultants, very unlikely. Is it impossible? I don't think we know, but it's one of those unanswered things that we talked about earlier. So I think that it was something that was discussed, investigated, and let go as a viable option.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just going to say that, I consider the purview of the building work group to be to look at options for building the building that the town, the Board of Selectmen, based on reports from its consultants, has determined is the best building, the best model of care going forward. So I have read, some critiques of the small house model, but, my statement earlier was that as a work group, we didn't investigate that, and I wouldn't want to waste a minute because we have such a large scope, and we'll still be working probably up until and after town meeting to answer all the questions that need to be answered. I wouldn't want to steer away from that focus. That's somebody else's job. Somebody's been paid a lot of money to do it, and then we have our Board of Selectmen and others who have reviewed it and decided that's the best way to go. Other comments and discussion from the committee?
Stephen, I'm not sure how this goes, but it seemed to me our conversation yesterday, personally, I would like to see this article go forward. I'd like to see the town move as quickly as possible to rebuild the facility. I thought we were talking yesterday, there was some, call it a political issue as to whether if this thing goes to town meeting and fails, then we're sort of put farther behind due to the...
That's my own fear. It doesn't come from anywhere else. I don't want to derail. My goal is to see ground broken on a new facility, wherever it may be. I think the best option is my comment, but wherever it's going to be, I want to see the new facility under construction as soon as possible. My fear was that if we fail at getting voter approval at town meeting or at the ballot this spring, that we push off that eventual construction date further than if we wait. Having had a day to meet with people, I didn't get a whole lot of work done today, except for on this. I feel more comfortable about where we are and where we can be by April 1st. I wish the town meeting was, at least a few weeks later in April. I think we could have even a better case. But I'm more comfortable today than I was 24 hours ago about how compelling our case can be, that my comment's the right place, that we have thoroughly investigated not one, but two options for construction on East Creek, and we'll know relative costs and timelines. So all those things being the case, and not having changed from the mindset that I want this to move forward, I think I'm coming around to your position, Joe, that we approve the measure, the work group and others continue their work, and hopefully we've done enough work by town meeting to get the support we need. Jean?
As I spent the day doing my homework, and thank you for getting us to read the work group report, it was illuminating on a couple of levels. One is to get a sense of perspective about how long this issue, this project has been around.
Right.
I mean, I just needed to be reminded of all of that. And then, the political aspects aside, I came to the strong conclusion that as a member of the Finance Committee, we need to support this article because the risks of delaying it, financial risks of delaying it, are just very large. And I don't think that's what we're here to support. So supporting the article is where I come down on this.
I just have one more thing to say about the model of institutional and the small houses. I think that we will see healthcare completely change inside of the next 20 years. And the way that people take care of their health and practice wellness is already different than it was 20 years ago. And we are not going to stay in the direction of institutionalized care. It is not the model that we're going to move forward at. And it's ceasing to become profitable in Massachusetts, and in 20 years it will not be the standard. So I agree.
Thank you. Chris?
I don't want to hold Dave up because I know he's trying to go out the door, so I'll ask you, can you just refresh our memory then on sort of the broad stroke scale of the dollar differences of the three options, if you recall them, I know.
Yeah, so these are broad. They don't include things like rerouting utility lines. They don't include any problems that might arise. But just relocating the landmark house and relocating the residents, that was estimated to be $7.5 million. That's right. And it hasn't been calculated. The calculations are underway for what the annual deficit will be for operating the facility if we have to build on site by closing certain wings of that. You know, we're going to have to pay more. We're going to lose more money. We're going to have to lay off some island workers here, which is has untold consequences. So I don't know that that building on the site by closing the wings has dollars associated with it yet. I'd say that work is underway and will be available for town meeting.
I would summarize you're right, but I'll give you one little difference. It's about somewhere between, we estimate for, these are horrible things to talk about, but the average stay is 2 years. So you can do the math on how long it takes to get down to a number of people that you can turn around and begin the construction. It's somewhere around 3.5 to 4 years. And so you start out with that delay at $100,000 a month, and that's a $5 million delay. If you were to talk to Stop and Shop or the hospital and say to them, what's the premium for building on the site? That's the math we have not done. We can speculate that it's anywhere from 10 to 30%, maybe more. So it's the 4.5 known million related to that simple adjustment for future dollars, and then the cost of building on that property if the state would allow it. And so it's only greater than that number.
And then there's the non-monetary impacts of the quality of life and quality of care that we can deliver in the facility while construction's going on next door or in the building.
Which has a capital number to it, because we would have to put more into the existing home for 3, 4, 5 years just to keep that up to par.
Right. And Dave, sorry, we will let you leave in a minute. That seven.
It's basketball playoff season. I got a game at 5, so the kids are. I'm hoping my other coach showed up.
Well, thank you for sticking around. That $7.5 million number for relocating the landmark house, that didn't include any code improvements or upfit to the building.
No, that was simply assuming a standard foundation, no complications, picking the facility up, putting in a new one about 30 feet off of Orange Street, moving the facility, relocating all of the utilities, new parking lots, but no assumption of anything of any kind of improvement, and assume that there were no complications like the soil needed pilings or any of those costs.
It's only built 180 years ago. I'm sure it's fine.
Well, I pulled the building the specs, and if you have a sense of humor, every single thing is just a simple drawing with a note that says typical, or it says as needed, and that was the detail. So as needed usually meant it didn't get done because you didn't want to point out you weren't doing it.
So, but it sounds like a big part of the cost component here is the time delay of the sort of the attrition of the people.
We didn't go a lot further because that seemed such a driver to us. We did do some work. I mean, we have talked to builders about what it would cost to move it. We have done an estimate, an informal estimate, but an engineering grade plus or minus 25% estimate on the cost of a foundation. So there was work done, not to the level I would have if somebody said to me, you're going to bid this project, but enough to have done an engineering review to say, sanity says these are reasonable numbers.
But just one other thought I'll just offer up, which is that given the high degree of vacancy in nursing homes around the state, it does sound like there would be lots of available beds within the state to temporarily move people to. Now, I get that would be
given
enormous inconvenience for
given the
families
timeline
and
for
patients.
Construction and the average length of stay at Island Home, the people that we move out will never come back.
Right. So you'd be saying to which families are you saying? And so this was an unanswerable question to us. And we looked at that and we said, okay, well, how would you determine who those people are? Is it last in? Is it a person who wasn't born here? Who's the person that you say you're going to move off island for the last 2 years of your life? Because the reality is you're not coming back. But again, I think if there were other driving factors that said this site was so incredibly fabulous that we had to make that work, and if you get unemotional about the issue of view and so on, and you start to look at it from a practical standpoint, the site's not offering an enormous amount of, it's got storm risk. Even if we decide that's minimal, it's got storm risk. It's got, you know, there are more negatives to the site than positives other than the view, which becomes very emotional rather than, you know, the kind of discussion we have to have given the fact that the community's supplementing these things. I understand.
Okay, I mean, everything we do on Nantucket is emotional, right? I mean,
Right,
we've
right.
looked at articles where we're not going to let people have swimming pools. We make them all paint their houses the same color, right? Every decision we make on this
Yep.
island. And there is a segment, a larger than small segment of this island that looks at us being in this business and is very proud of the fact that takes great civic pride about the fact that it doesn't see it as an inconvenience.
Right, and my goal is just to give people the numbers and the timeline as best we can figure it. You know, here's the extra
Yeah, and
that,
I think we
that,
do.
that people are going to have to pay. You know, the extra stuff you'll have to put up with. If you really want it here, it is possible. You know, here's
And I think that's the right approach, and I can tell you, I think you guys are making a hell of an effort and a lot of progress in doing that hasn't really been done.
And I don't want you to get me wrong about the comment emotional, because we've all had a fair amount of discussion, and you know, there's a lot of passion in the room to get this right for a long time. So, I mean, that's an emotional part of this. We, you know, again, I'll say this. We want this to last multiple generations. We want it to be flexible enough to change as healthcare changes and deal with what things I can't predict. My kids, I have no idea what that generation is going to use this facility for. I don't know what medical services will even look like in 30 or 40 years. And so that's what one of the subtle, quiet benefits of this model gets you, is the flexibility in the future that an institutional model doesn't. Nice day, guys.
Thank you, Dave.
Good luck.
Thanks, Dave.
All right. So where are we? Are we ready to
Yes.
take an action? Yeah. Great. I'll ask for a motion then.
I make a motion that we accept what is written here for Article 14 and move forward.
Second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. And now we move on to 15.
Motion to adopt?
Second.
Chris, you brought up, so now we're in the discussion phase of the motion. Thank you guys for making it. Chris, you brought up the issue of, do we want to buy the property before we get do we want to bind ourselves to buy the property before we get the results of the RTO study? We will have those results, as I understand it. We were updated this afternoon. We'll have the results of the RTO study before town meeting. Is that right?
I think we're hoping to. I'm not sure we're going to have a written report, but we're not binding ourselves. It's an authorization article, and if we don't have the results, or if the results are not favorable, then we won't proceed.
Okay, so somewhere in that purchase and sale agreement is a contingency that if the portion of the property we're buying is unbuildable, or
Then we
whatever,
don't
can back out.
we don't proceed. And I know I wasn't here yesterday. I'm sorry about that, but I thought I had heard there might have been some discussion about if 14 fails, are we still going ahead with 15? The selectmen did have some discussion about that, and I think their general consensus was to proceed with 15 regardless of whether or not it would be used for our island home. It could still be used for housing.
But not regardless of the RTO study.
Right. That would be
Okay.
So,
Fact.
Just
I'm sorry,
really want to hammer that home.
Do you mind clarifying on that last part, that they would proceed to buy it even if they knew the island home funding had failed? Not just looking for the authorization to proceed either way, but they actually would proceed.
Well, I
even
think
if
they would talk about it again,
Okay.
but they did say at a meeting that if the island home fails, we should consider purchasing the property anyway. We should, really the discussion was about proceeding with the article, keeping it on the warrant.
Okay,
but I
that
think
was the distinction
I might have gotten ahead of myself a little bit, but
I get what you're saying. It's fair.
I think they were seriously considering moving ahead and purchasing the property if the island home weren't going to go there.
Because I mean that part of it's much harder for me to understand.
Yeah. And Chris, I'm looking at the GIS map now. I need to apologize. I thought that the house was closer to My Comet Road and was not in the area that the town's buying, and that's not the case.
So we are buying
It's essentially the eastern half, I guess. Of
See,
these
that's
two.
why it's confusing to me that we'd buy an improved on property like that. It's just a call option. Let me back up and maybe I can short circuit this. I'm in support, and I hope that no matter how people feel about the previous article and where they hope that ends up, they'll be in support too, just for the option value of having this if ultimately the Allen home needs to go there.
Right.
But it is confusing to me now.
Yeah. Well, I think I share your concerns about buying the property if we're not going to put the island home there. I'm not sure.
Just so you know, I don't know if you guys have looked at the Google map I mean, there's a nice home with a swimming pool on it that we're authorizing the money to buy regardless of whether we put the island home there, and that perplexes me.
The home that's there now would, if the island home goes there, will be removed, obviously. And if the island home weren't going to go there, it might be removed also to make room for housing there.
I understand that, but I don't think we would, under normal circumstances, pay the price tag to buy an improved upon property with a reasonably inhabitable home on it to destroy it, to put other stuff. It seems like that's not a decision you'd make.
I can't even speak to that, other than the selectmen said, let's leave it on the warrant, and we would consider using the property for housing regardless of the island home. So
Yeah,
we would obviously have to look
another
at
forum to discuss that
how
if
it could
that
work.
becomes the case, and hopefully it's not.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. David, you can join us again. And thank you, everyone. That was a good discussion. Appreciate it. Henry, nice job.
Yeah, thank you very much, you guys that are laboring on yet another committee. Thank you. The only thing I have, I got copied on an email regarding the Academy Hill and CBC funding. It came in a little after 3 this afternoon, and from John Giorgio. And just, it's nothing that we have to act upon, but it's just an FYI. It would appear, if I'm reading this correctly, and I know Libby, Brian, and Julia got copied on this as well, is that the CPC could meet again before town meeting, and by meeting they could authorize that the money go into the community housing reserve instead of falling to, I want to get the words correctly, it's not going to disappear. It'll still remain in there amongst their unused funds. But if they voted before town meeting, it would appear they could then use it ahead of waiting for the state to recertify it or something like that. It's not going to go away. It'll be available to them, and it doesn't require us doing anything else. But if they so desire to get together, they can put it into the housing reserve, and then they could use the money for something without having to wait however long they have to wait.
Okay.
That sounds positive. What can they use it for without having to get authorization from town meeting?
I think they would have to go. That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I'm assuming that they would have to come. That they would have to come back around, but they wouldn't necessarily have to wait. It has to do with timing of the Department of Revenue and how they.
Right. Yeah, the recertification can take a while.
Yeah.
We see that with enterprise funds. But does this give them greater latitude to decide what to spend it on than they otherwise have? Brian?
I have to be honest, I haven't had a chance to fully digest that email yet, so I don't know that they would have greater latitude to spend it, other than they could come back to another town meeting before the tax rate was set and ask for the appropriation again if they did not, as I understand it, and I got to read it one more time, but if they didn't have another meeting prior to town meeting to vote to put it into the reserve, then they have until the tax rate is set where they could, if there was a special town meeting, they could come back and ask for that money to be appropriated to something else, or try to reappropriate it, I guess, to this particular project all over again.
And
But once
how
the tax rate is set, they can't. They can't appropriate directly from revenues because it's all calculated into when the tax rate is done.
And I realize this email just came in. Does anybody know how this would affect if CPC meets, decides to reallocate the funds to sort of an unclassified housing use? How does that affect plans that I read in the paper to reinstitute this funding for the original use of the window repair? Can that still be done after CPC modifies this?
There'd have to be another amendment, wouldn't there? We'd have to check.
Or don't. We'll find out together. April 1st. It's okay.
know in advance.
Yeah. All right.
Anyway, so Brian, you might want to share that email with the committee.
Okay.
I appreciate it. Do we have any other business to transact?
When's our next meeting?
The next meeting, I think, is March 29. It's the Wednesday at 1 o'clock.
Yep, right now we've got you meeting at 1 to do any technical numbers, wrap up whatever's come up since now. And then the pre-town meeting conference, I think is at 2. What day was moderated?
Yep.
We haven't done one. No, we haven't done one. So we'll get you that.
Sorry, we're talking about March 29th?
Yeah. And that meeting is usually short, so it's recently become our policy that we won't take changes ahead of town meeting unless they are extremely minor. We will take them on the Wednesday, the 29th, but once town meeting comes.
What time does town meeting start? 9?
8:30? 8? Town meeting? 8:30? Town meeting? 9?
But get there.
So that'll be our next meeting, and then beyond that, I would, if the committee is willing, I would like to, and town folks are willing, to have one meeting in April, because I would like to do a what I'll call what went right, what went wrong analysis of this year and how we could improve, and promise not to drag it out. And I don't have a date, but I think it would be helpful and beneficial. So if you are all willing to donate another hour or so of time. And otherwise, I think we'll be done until early July.
Sounds like a good idea. Do we want to try to pick a date?
Are you guys in a position to pick a date?
Sure.
I would suggest either the week of the 10th or the week of the 17th.
One of those is the school vacation.
Yeah, 17th is school vacation.
Week of the 10th looks pretty good.
The 10th is, I'm just going to say some stuff. The election is on the 11th. The 12th is always a day to, it's a little bit transitional. I'm not going to be here the 13th or the 14th.
Okay.
Following week is school vacation week. I don't know, I think I'm
And
going to be there.
At the risk of being very unpopular, why not just do it the week right after town meeting? I mean, I know it's a lot, but it's fresh in our minds, and then it's outside of all this other. Because otherwise, we're not meeting till the end of April, and then it kind of defeats the purpose of meeting to decide.
It's fine with me.
Yeah, I mean, I know that's a lot of meeting in 1 week, but we get it done.
I'm away the 5th, 6th, and 7th.
I'd like to see the third and the fourth.
Maybe Tuesday the fourth,
Yeah,
just in case,
Yeah.
hopefully, it won't happen, but in case town meeting goes on like that.
it's not gonna happen.
Okay, 4?
So
Fourth?
Tuesday, the April 4th?
Yeah, at 4 o'clock.
Do you want to do it in this room, Mr. Chairman?
You know, can we do it upstairs?
I think HDC starts at 4:30.
Oh, okay.
So it might be
All right, then we'll do it here.
Okay. We'll make sure to reserve it.
That would be great.
So 4 at 4 p.m.
There you go. Yes,
There's something to that.
444. All right. Well, yes, go ahead.
Libby, one non-FinCom type question. Who gets direction on how to set up the town meeting? The head table? Who gives direction to do that?
Oh, usually Catherine. Why do you?
I'll make a few suggestions then. No, it's just like this, and there's people,
Well-
you know.
Because the planning board decided they need to be set up front also. You all are cramped over on that side.
It just
Oh.
it's,
So it wasn't originally set up like that?
I would just think that the clerk and the assistant clerk and the timekeeper or whatnot should go off to the side of the dais or above us or somewhere just to free up space.
Would suggest you could bring that to the town clerk.
Well, that's
I'll
easy.
make a motion to that effect.
Oh,
Peter, you're being nominated as our emissary.
I do setups for a living, so it just,
Well, maybe we could all be on the.
No, I agree. I mean, last time,
it just gets.
special town meeting, I had about this much space. It's crazy.
We're cramped on our side too, because we can't. Somehow can't be-
There's a whole stage.
I've seen it moved.
Well, apparently it costs a bunch of money to move it, has to be returned.
It's the right committee to make that.
If it means we get some shoulder room, maybe we can
It's
find
more-
that in free cash.
Yeah.
That
We're not getting breakfast, so
Yeah.
hopefully you'll get some lunch.
Anyway, I would, I want to say thank you very much for all the work that everybody put in. Thank you for those of you that stepped up partway through the year, and I think a couple of you were at least committed for a while. Jean, I think you're the one who's on the short term. Hopefully you'll consider joining us next year,
Yeah, re-enlisting.
re-enlisting.
I'll think about it.
So, you know, I really appreciate all the work, and I appreciate the discussion and the civil discourse that takes place and the input that everybody has. It's always quite, I just really appreciate that we go through meetings, we make decisions, we do it without rancor. There's not a lot of, hopefully there's no yelling in this room. I don't think there has been. So anyway, thank you all very much appreciate it. So,
Thank you.
David.
thank you, David.
Yeah, thank you.
Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you very much.